You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan R. Karachi, a podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs become even more successful. Let's jump into today's episode. Hey, welcome back to the Business Stories podcast. And as always, this is a podcast committed to entrepreneurs who want to grow and develop, or people who are considering business ownership and want to find out more. So if you're listening and you're interested in looking into business ownership, you're living the corporate life, and you might be looking at other ways to grow, develop, go off on your own. My guest today is Tom Scarda. He is a prior franchisee. He currently works as a franchise consultant. He runs the Franchise Academy. So he's got a ton of content, books, podcasts, videos to help people like you really understand franchising and business ownership. So Tom, great to talk to you. Thank you for joining me here.
Yeah, Ryan, this is great. Thank you for having me on.
So let's talk about your journey into franchising. You went from a corporate world into this franchising opportunity, and tell us about that background with you.
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't really corporate. I worked a government job. I was a subway conductor in New York City.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If you ever rode the New York City subway, I was the guy opening and closing doors and making announcements that you could barely understand. And I'm going back a long time ago, but I was there and I worked my way up the line. But early on, at 23 years old, when I first started, there was an old timer there, and he said to me, "Hey, kid, this is a great job because you'll always have a shirt on your back." He said, "You'll never have a silk shirt, but at least you'll have a shirt."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Wait a second, that sounds like mediocrity, man."
Yeah.
And I looked at my bosses, and they were not living the lifestyle I wanted to live. But I realized business owners were. And in that moment, I decided, I want to be a business owner. But how
Yeah.
do I do that? I'm a government guy. I know nothing about business. I know nothing about sales or anything. And I realized that a franchise is a business with training wheels. And that's what I needed. Somebody to hold my hand, show me the ropes. And it turned out to be a hands-on MBA, actually owning and operating a franchise. And that worked out really well for me.
That's great. So kind of walk us through, I think one of the biggest things people think about listening is it sounds like such a scary thing. It's a big leap to go from that life into franchising. What did you have to drive out of yourself, or what did you learn about, making that decision in your own life? And what kind of advice can you give people listening who have the fear, the anxiety, the worry, and the unknown, when it comes to that?
I mean, where do I even start? I mean, that
Right.
so I wrote a book about it called The Magic of Choosing Uncertainty. And anybody who's listening, contact Ryan and let him know. I'll give you a free copy of my book because it's really worth it. I wrote it to help people get out of their comfort zone. And I share with people all the time, you could look at a bunch of franchises and you get excited and some things are really awesome and you're trying to make that decision. Is it the choice between franchise A or is it franchise B? And then you realize at the end that the real choice is the choice between uncertainty or unhappiness.
Yeah.
That's what you're dealing with.
Right.
And most people choose unhappiness, Ryan. They stick with the stupid job and the stupid boss and the commute and missing the kids' soccer games and like all this stuff. And it takes courage to turn that 180 degrees and take control for yourself. So there's a lot that goes into it. But the first thing is you got to realize that whether it's a business or a job, it's just a vehicle to get you what you want in life. And if you want more than just paying the bills, a business might be the way to go.
So when you talk about the match, right, finding, I mean, it seems like it's such a challenging decision because you're going from the mindset of I've got a job, it's okay, I'm comfortable, to going into, okay, I want to own a business and it has to be a match for me. It has to be something I'm passionate about. So walk us through creating that match for the right situation at the right time for the right person.
So interesting. The thing is, we're taught to go to school and get a job and be happy and shut up. And
Right.
according to a recent survey, I think it was more than 85% of Americans, I think it was 87% of Americans are ready to change their job right now, today.
Yeah.
right? And then 57% of people that get a new job, I'm sorry, what was the number? Then once somebody gets a new job, it takes 57 days for them to start looking for a new job.
Wow, it's not a lot of time.
No.
Yeah,
And so maybe it's not the person, but maybe it's corporate America that stinks.
right.
So the problem is that people come about it the wrong way because we're all taught, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And that's true if you're working a job, but a business is not a job.
Yeah,
And so you got to kind of throw that kind of passion out the window, but people don't know what to do, especially if they don't get a chance to talk to, a franchise consultant where, we're going to help you understand what your strengths are and really try to find you a business that is going to give you the time and the money to do the things that you enjoy, but not buy a business around your passion or your hobby, because
right.
that will go downhill very quickly.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of clients you've worked with over the years of kind of displays what you're saying then and how it's really helped them grow and develop just through that process?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got a million stories. I've been doing this 20
Yeah,
years as a consultant,
right.
but something that comes to mind is I owned a Maui Wowie Smoothies was my first franchise. And I had it for 5 years. I sold it, and it enabled me to semi-retire at 41 years old when I sold it. And several years later, I don't know, 5 or 7 years later, somebody opened up a Maui Wowie Smoothies right in my town in Long Island where I was living at the time. And they had great smoothies. So I went in, introduced myself. I didn't say who I was, but I
Yeah,
was talking to the owner, and I said, why did you choose this smoothie franchise? And the lady started gushing. Oh my goodness, we love smoothies. We drink smoothies every day. My husband, my kids, we all love it. I was
yeah.
like, oh, that's awesome. All right, great. Okay, good luck. And so my wife and I took our smoothies. We walked outside. I turned to my wife and I was like, they're going to be out of business in a year. And she's like, why? I was like, you don't buy a business because you love the product or the service.
Right.
Because when it's really tough, or if there's a family wedding on a Saturday, but you can't go because you got to be in the store, you're gonna really hate that business.
Yeah.
And and they were out of business. I believe it was 7 months after that
Oh,
conversation.
wow.
They just walked away from it. And that,
That's
and that it breaks my heart because people just don't know how to approach it. And I didn't either. When I first started thinking about franchising, I wanted to get into an ice cream franchise and I ended up getting in touch with a consultant. Um and she's like, yeah, you could do that if you don't want to make money. It's
yeah,
like they don't make a lot of money and it's very seasonal, especially in New York.
right.
So yeah, I have a million stories like that.
So I think some people listening may not really understand what a franchise consultant's role is because I think some people have this perception that they're just like, oh, this person just wants to sell me a business and collect a lot of money and collect their commission and that's their whole thing, right? Like I think there's some misconceptions around consultants and what they actually do. So can you
Yeah.
kind of go over a little bit about like really deep dive into understanding like what does someone in your role really do to help people out there looking?
Great question, and it's insightful because you're correct. I mean, there are people out there, unfortunately, that this is very transactional and they're after the commission.
Right.
You know, for me, I've been in 5 different businesses. Two were franchise. As I mentioned, my first franchise was a huge success. My second franchise actually failed, and I lost a ton of money.
Mhm.
But that's what made me a franchise expert.
Yeah.
But I have empathy and compassion when somebody comes to me and they're like, "Oh, I saw this great new thing." Like I was talking to this lady, I guess it was last year.
Yeah.
It was an ice cream store for dogs only. They didn't sell human ice cream. They only sold dog ice cream.
Okay.
And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like I didn't say it like that, but it's like
Yeah.
you got to really open up your eyes here, miss. And
Yeah.
and and so what we do is, and what I do anyway, is I help people first identify their skill set, what they love to do as far as work goes, and really what they dislike,
Yeah.
and a whole bunch of other different criteria. But ultimately, find them a franchise where they're going to employ their skills and what they love to do, and then hire people or have the help of the franchise to do the things that they don't like to do. And
Yeah.
so what I mean by that is if you're like, I don't know, a wallflower, right? You're very kind of timid and that kind of thing. There might be a franchise for you, but it's not going to be one where you're interfacing with customers
Right.
and doing sales all day long. You'll
Yeah.
hire somebody to do that, and you do the back office. And there's franchises meant for somebody like that, and there's
Yeah.
franchises meant for somebody who's gregarious and they're talking to everybody, and they'll
Right.
know your life story in the first 20 minutes of meeting you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we help them identify that, and I write a business model for them that identifies all those characteristics. And then I use that model to sift through all the franchises, and there's like 4,390 industries. And I come back with a short list of companies that have exactly what they're looking for. And then I become a coach, and I coach them literally on a weekly basis through the entire due diligence, top to bottom, everything that they need to know in order to invest in a business. And I'll just share with you quickly on based on all of that. You know, it's like about 60% of the people that contact me, you know, they're probably too scared to buy a franchise. I mean, I try to get them educated, but they just go the other way.
Yeah.
And they choose unhappiness instead of uncertainty.
Yeah.
30% of the people, I tell them, whatever you do, do not buy a business, but keep a job or get a job because you're just not cut out for business.
Yeah.
And then 10% of the people will buy something, and majority of them are successful. And I'll lie to you if I say all of them are successful. That not
Right.
everybody makes it,
Yeah.
but majority do because they're so well matched based on our process.
Right. So it's interesting because you're really saying you're matching more on personality, demeanor, and less on like a product or service they're intrigued by or they're interested in. So
Yes.
you're really matching someone based on who they are and their own personality and what their motivations are and all of that. And you found that makes the situation better and more successful over time because you're matching them based on their personality and their interests. Well, I shouldn't say their interests, but sort of who they are over what they necessarily care about, right?
Right, right, exactly. Because if I mean, there's all sorts of stats out there that you could look up, but if you're like, hey, I don't know if you ever read the book The E-Myth.
Yeah.
Anyone who's listening to this right now, go to Amazon right now and buy the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. And that book explains all its E-Myth means the entrepreneurial myth. And he talks about all these examples that Ryan, but I'll just say, for the listeners right now, an example is like, I'm just saying hypothetically, I'm a great baker. I bake cakes for everybody's birthdays. Everybody loves my cakes, and I'm making cupcakes and all this stuff. And everybody's like, oh, you should open up a bakery. And so then I go and I open up a bakery because I'm a great baker. Everybody says it, and then, 6 months into it, I realized that baking is only 10% of running a bakery.
Right.
90% of everything else, the business of the business, and I don't know anything about that. And so one of two things happens. Either I plateau and I chase my tail trying to make money, burn myself out, or I literally fail because I don't know how to run a business. And that is the scary part. So instead, we back up and we say, wait a second, let's figure out what you love to do and find a franchise that will allow you to do that, whatever that is. And so you have to be comfortable with the role of the owner, not the product or service. People are like, oh, but I love the food. That's why I want to buy it. I'm like, that is a major mistake. Um, I love cars, so I want to get into window tinting. Like that doesn't make sense to me, but people do that. They want to be around, or I love dogs. I want to get into a dog thing and you got to realize you're not rolling around with dogs, playing with them. You're running a business,
Right. Right.
and so um, and at the end you could be a vegetarian and own a Five Guys Burgers and Fries. You're not going to be in there touching the burgers. You're
Right.
running a business.
Right. Yeah, you make an interesting point, and I want to ask you too. You've got this book out, about risk, right? And about how to understand risk, the value behind risk. And can you talk a little bit about, because I'm sure people think about that, like this is a huge risk, not just for me, but for my family and everything else. Talk about how you look at risk and how to manage it.
Well, it's a calculated risk if you do it the right way. So, you're not just throwing your money into something because you'll love the way the burger tastes. So, um,
Right,
you know, if it's a franchise, it's awesome because you get to talk to franchise owners and the company. You get to interview the leadership, and they're going to interview you. And so it's a track record to look at, and numbers, and all of this stuff. And so it's a much, I guess, better risk. I mean, it's still a risk. It doesn't, people fail in franchising. I mean, I did, I failed in a franchise. So you got to, and that's probably a better thing is like, I talk about that and how that didn't work out. But to when you're looking at risk, it's all about number one, don't risk more than you can stomach losing. That's
right,
the first thing.
right,
Um, I always say never invest more than half of your net worth is another good rule of thumb to know. And at the end, it's, if you get into this, are you willing to put 110% into it? Everything you got to make it happen. Failure is not an option. You have to have that attitude.
right.
Everything else falls into place.
Yeah,
You could do numbers from here to eternity on a franchise, and you could make numbers do all sorts of things. Um, but in the end, it's really your gumption. It's really, do you have the chutzpah to do it? You got to have that gut, like, yeah, man, failure's not an option. I'm going to make this happen no matter what. And
right.
that's how I felt about my smoothie thing. I'm like, if I get into this thing, I am going to build this franchise. If I have to stand in Times Square and
Yeah,
sell smoothies, I don't care. This is what I'm doing.
yeah,
And you got to have that kind of attitude.
yeah. I want to ask you too about your personal journey with the failure, because I mean that what I love about people like you and entrepreneurs is that they have this sort of toughness where they can fall and get back up. I mean, walk us through sort of the emotion of that time for you and what did you do to kind of rebound from there?
So it's a great question. So, when this business failed, yeah, I was crying. I mean, I lost a lot of money. Um,
Yeah,
but now I look at it as a blessing because I mean, I'm literally able to help people. So somebody said to me once, if you're in a firefight in a war, you're hoping that the person next to you in the firefight was actually in a firefight before and not teaching at West Point.
right,
And I've been in a firefight.
right,
And
right.
and so it is all about attitude, and that's what makes the whole entrepreneurial person survive.
Yeah,
If you're not failing if you didn't fail at something, you haven't lived.
right.
You have to have that kind of attitude. Um, but so coming out of it, it was like, okay, now we got to tighten our belts. We had to make some strategic moves with banks and credit cards, and my credit score went down to like it was like forget it. Um, and it stunk. But then I worked at it, and I started rebuilding. I found this gig that I have now with being a franchise consultant, and I was like, you know what? It's sort of almost like the hero's journey. Not to sound like a jerk about this, but
Right.
but it's like when you go along in life and you're doing what you do, and all of a sudden you run into a crisis and you find yourself in a valley, and that's the failure. And then you climb out of it. And when you get to the top of that valley, and now you're back on the top of the mountain, what do? You teach. And that's,
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing.
yeah. Oh, that's a great way to look at it. I love that. So, as we kind of wrap this up, Tom, too, like I want to ask you, you've got the Franchise Academy. I want to know what's available for people out there listening who want to look into this, want to learn more. I know you've got a lot of resources, so where can people learn more and what's the best avenue for them to take with you?
Well, just go to my website, which is just it's just my name, Tom Scarda, Scarda. So tomscarda.com or the franchiseacademy.com, same website. Um, and just about everything is on there. I actually have a an online course with 44 videos on how to buy a franchise. It's on sale now. It's like I think it's only $100 right now. Um, and I have 200 videos on YouTube. Um, articles or write for Entrepreneur Magazine. I mean, like whatever people need to know about me, it's all out there.
Yeah,
Check out my LinkedIn. Just put my name in Google, and you'll probably find me somewhere. Hopefully,
yeah.
in the first 5 pages or something.
I want to ask you like one last question too. If you were to go back in time and bump into yourself at 23, working on the New York subway, and being the person you are now, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
I would. That's a. I love that question.
Yeah,
I would tell myself, don't worry about what anybody thinks, and don't listen to everybody else's advice.
yeah,
But go out and do what you want to do
yeah,
and forget it. I mean, even like your parents,
right.
like when I bought the smoothie franchise, my dad, he was a New York City police officer, and in very colorful language that I won't use now, he called me an idiot for buying something, called Maui Wowie. He's like, "Are you kidding me? And you're gonna quit a government job with a pension?"
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah," and within 4 months, I was making per month what I was making per year as a government worker.
Yeah.
So,
And how
and on
did
the
you,
gross sale, not net, all that stuff.
right.
But I mean, because you take it, what's the there's a quote that says something to the effect of success, success favors the bold.
Right.
And so that's the universe moves in your direction if you are taking risk. If you choose uncertainty, that's where magic happens, man.
Yeah.
And I wish I had a formula for it where I could say, A plus B, add a little C and D, and you're going to get Z. It just doesn't work like that. You got to step out. You got to get in the ring. Don't be a spectator. The worst that's going to happen is, you might lose a couple of bucks,
Yeah.
but it'll be, people always regret what they didn't do, not what they did do.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, like, in your dad's defense and even like, my parents' generation, there's kind of that generation that finds that that job or corporate career, that's the route you take, right? So,
Right.
and that's their mindset. That's just been embedded in their brains since they were young. And that's what
Hmm.
they think the life should always be. And I think that, anything that challenges that, obviously, they're gonna question that. It makes sense. So,
Right. And thank you for that. You
yeah,
you you're totally correct about that. And
right,
coming out of like the Great Depression era and
right,
World War II and so I get it.
yeah, right,
But again, don't let the dogma of other people stop you. I think Steve Jobs said something like that.
right, right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for doing this with me. And I hope if you are listening, you'll reach out to Tom, take advantage of all that he has to offer, all the videos, the academy, the books, the articles, everything. It's been great, Tom, and I appreciate you. I hope we can continue this conversation in the future, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely, Ryan. Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Hey, this is Ryan with the Business Stories Podcast. And if you're a franchisor, franchise consultant, broker, or just a small business owner, you've got to check out clienttether.com. It's an amazing sales automation tool that is revolutionizing the industry. If you want to learn more, go to clienttether.com and inquire within.